t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime. Tu m'avais manqué, Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime. T'es ma préférée, Bruxelles, je t'aime, Bruxelles, je t'aime.
Hi there, welcome to Brussels, My Love, Euronews' weekly talk show that takes a closer look at news across Europe. I'm Maeve McMahon. Thanks for watching. Coming up this week, well, it was back to school for the Brussels bubble. The EU institutions opened their doors again after their summer slumber. Tanned, relaxed faces could be spotted around the EU quarter, but stressing people out, last weekend's regional elections in Germany. For the first time since World War II, the far-right AfD won a major election, shaking the Berlin establishment and leaving Brussels with a serious hangover. And it's a man's world, in politics anyway. EU governments have proposed their candidates for the EU Commission. Their deadline was last Friday. But, much to the dismay of the Commission President, there are more male names than female. We take a look at Ursula von der Leyen's obsession with having a gender-balanced team and ask why we need more women at the top table of European politics. A warm welcome to our guests this weekend: Petros Vassoulas, Secretary General of the European Movement; Anja Scherpeck, Director of Research and Training at FEPS; and Peter Liese, German MEP from the European People's Party. Thank you so much for joining us. Are you happy to be back here in Brussels?
Yes, I am.
Ish. But before we hear more from you, let's just tell our viewers why last weekend's regional elections in Germany were so talked about here in Brussels.
The results were symbolic. Germany's far right will not control either of the two eastern states where they scored huge victories. But they take the country into uncharted territory. Chancellor Scholz called the results bitter. He urged the other parties to keep the AfD from power. But to do that, they would be forced into ideologically abnormal coalitions. There doesn't seem to be any alternative. The AfD is routinely flirting with Nazi rhetoric and is being monitored by Germany's security services. No other party wants to work with them. But 1 out of 3 voters in East Germany preferred the AfD over the country's political establishment and spin-offs of the old Communist Party. One thing is certain: Germany's party system is increasingly fragmented and stable governments are ever more difficult to build.
Well, let's look at our German around the table. Peter Liese, what is going on? I mean, has the far-right success left Germany in a real mess?
It's a serious situation and we need to draw consequences, but it's very important for the European audience. The two regions where the AfD has unfortunately get a lot of votes, this is not Germany. You know, at the European election, we had a different result. There was a pro-European majority, clearly, in Germany. My party, CDU, had twice as many votes than the AfD. And we need to look at it, but nobody should now think that Germany is turning like Hungary or Slovakia. So we are still having a pro-European majority in the country.
But one thing is clear: the far right is in Germany and it's not going anywhere. How have you been reacting to the outcome there?
This is not something new. There has been a trend. The mere existence of AfD demonstrates that there is a section of the population that has these kind of political views. But then there are also systemic issues there that are fueling additional votes to be channeled to the support of these unsavory parties. And I think we need to not panic, like Peter said, but take a view and understand what are the reasons, the economic, social, geographical, political reasons that are making people lose faith in mainstream parties and look for answers to the challenges they face to political parties that don't care about them really.
And it's worth pointing out on the 22nd of September, there will be elections as well in Brandenburg that we should keep an eye on as well. What could all this mean, Anya, for next year's elections taking place in Germany, the federal elections?
I think if you want to really speak about dismantling this trend of the rise of right-wing radicals and populism, you have to disqualify them, and you have to disqualify them by the specific answers. And the answers, and I think that's perfectly right, that there are different types of elections. European elections have told us that people are vastly concerned about the standards of living and the quality of work, but these elections have told us that people want certain answers, what we are going to do about migration and what we are going to do about the issue of ensuring peace in Ukraine and how we are going to go about that.
Well, indeed, these elections, the main issues were migration, indeed, weapons as well being given to Ukraine. Climate change was very low down on the list, not really a priority of voters. But let's just bring in a voice from the party, the AfD, and take a listen to Alice Weidel. She is the co-chair of the party and a member of the German Bundestag.
What we have seen is a dramatically poor performance by the coalition government. This was the vote in favour of voting out the traffic light government. The voters also want new elections at federal level. We are preparing for this, and accordingly, Chancellor Olaf Scholz should draw the consequences and, together with his coalition partners, pack his bags and vacate the chair, because the voters want a different government. They want a different policy.
But Peter Liese, does she have a point there? Is it time for Olaf Scholz to pack up his bags and leave the building?
Yeah, first of all, I think it's very important that all the other democratic parties keep the firewall to AfD. So, and my judgment of the situation is independent on what this lady says or anyone else from AfD. They are out of any option to get to the government, and that's a good thing. Also, after this election, my friends in Saxonia and Thuringia, they keep the firewall. On the other hand, there is a problem with politics in Germany and partly also in Europe, in Brussels. So we need to listen better to people. I spent also time in my constituency during summer, and sometimes I feel I'm in different worlds when I'm inside Brussels and in my constituency. So migration is an issue. We need to do better, and Europe and Germany needs to work together. Economy is a problem, bureaucracy.
Peter Liese, like we've been hearing this for so many years.
No.
Brussels needs to do better. It needs to listen to the people.
Yeah, it's true.
And meanwhile, AfD are mopping up the votes. They're also on TikTok.
No, please. We have a different parliament. We have a different commission, hopefully in the end of this week. And we have different council of ministers. And I'm sure that we have better opportunities to address the problems. And everybody needs to understand this. It's not the same thing like we are telling 10 years. We will take that serious. And we have to take it serious. And people inside Brussels need to listen better what average people on the ground think.
Indeed, people here love to talk, but are they good at listening here in Brussels?
But that's exactly a key question, because we are talking about listening, or we are talking about talking too, but we are not talking about the conversation. And I think you've been trying to make a point about the TikTok. At first, we have been doing a number of studies why young people actually vote the right-wing parties and what's happening around there. And on one side, it's of course this question of creating bubbles in which these parties were particularly successful in infiltrating them. But the other thing is the different patterns of political participation. You've mentioned, climate change has been quite low on the agenda, but that's because the other concerns have gone higher, not because climate change is suddenly less important. And I think the problem there is, especially with this segment of the generation, we need a very different way of approaching the conversation in order to reconnect. So I think that that's rather the issue than listening. We know what they are saying.
And Petrus, the messaging of the AfD party in general, who are also known, I think, as the TikTok party, it's very emotional. I saw Maximilian Krah, the German AfD MEP, he's reaching out to people on his TikTok, even giving them tips on how to get a girlfriend, saying, you need to be a strong man, you need to be a patriot, and that's the way to get a girlfriend. You need to be far right, he said.
They try to poison the political discourse. They try to undermine the very fabric of society. These political parties are not interested in creation. They're not interested in solutions. They want fragmentation. They want chaos. They want political instability. That's why the calls for elections or the efforts to undermine fundamental institutions that underpin democracy. We've seen the lessons from history. The intention of AfD and authoritarian fascist parties is to destroy, to undermine and emerge as the only savior out of the chaos that they created. So it is very important, and just to echo what was just said, to make sure that we don't start squabbling, we don't run away from our fundamental pro-democratic, pro-European principles, adopting the rhetoric or even some of the prescriptions that they offer, whether it's about immigration or the economy. The European Union and the federal government, the governments at the national level are doing a lot. We need to offer leadership, tell people that there are difficult decisions to make, but offer them a solution to those.
And that's what you need to take into account in your party, Anya.
Yeah, I want to come in because you've asked, they are demanding elections, but, the demanding the election doesn't mean at all, and we've seen that in the European context in the recent months. Demanding elections doesn't mean that exactly the same results that have been noted in Turin and in Saxony, that they are going to be repeated. So this is kind of projecting fear, projecting pressure, keeping people hostage to sort of abide by predefined political discourse, but it is not a guarantee that we will see a change. We've seen it in France recently.
Absolutely, and we're keeping, of course, a very close eye on the situation as well in France. But just back to Germany, not everyone in Brussels is worried about the success of the far right. For another view, we spoke to Richard Schenk from the conservative think tank MCC.
Many parties and many media outlets spend most of their efforts in criticizing the AfD, even demonizing them. What we saw, that the trust in these institutions and media outlets often fell to record low levels, but the AfD now enjoys record high results at the elections. So this strategy clearly didn't work. And what the AfD and also the BSW had an answer to, what many other parties did not, is migration. So the AfD used to be a protest party, and this many other parties should be worried about now.
Richard Schenk there with a different point of view. Peter, are you worried?
Of course I'm worried. And it's also part of the problem that we have a weak government. The Greens didn't understand that we need to take care about jobs and economy much more than we did before. The Liberals are not interested in success, but only in getting their profile against the other parties, including the government. And the Chancellor is not managing this conflict. So there is a big problem, and that must be solved in the next German election. But on the other end, the AfD, they are more far right than many other European parties. Even Le Pen doesn't want to work with them. And in my speeches, I always criticize the government, but I criticize even more the AfD, and that's the right thing. They have no solutions. We need to tackle the problems, and despite migration, I think bureaucracy is such a big issue. Whenever I come to my constituency, people complain. We are in favor of, you mentioned climate change, we are in favor of the Green Deal, but we need to do it with less bureaucracy. It is impossible, the paperwork and the detailed micromanagement. So that has to change, and then I'm optimistic that for the next national election we will have a quite good result for the pro-European parties.
We will see. But this idea of bureaucracy, how do you tackle that? It feels a bit like Mission Impossible.
Well, it's one of those words that are easy to use and difficult to define. Because, of course, we need bureaucracy. We do need a process. We do need paperwork to make sure that things are done properly.
But not as much as we have now.
Sometimes, perhaps, the focus is on the wrong end of the scale. But again, this is the challenge, I think, for policymakers, also to articulate the necessity of certain measures. And the reason why those measures hurt is because we took a bit too long to implement them. So we need to be careful, because by bureaucracy our fellow citizens might understand even elected politicians. They might understand even the city councillor who is there to help them. So we need to be able to avoid using the terminology in a negative term the way others are using, because as we have all agreed, they don't care about solving the environmental crisis, they don't care about solving migration. Their prescription is actually worsening the situation. We need to be confident and follow the policies that we adopt here democratically, collectively.
And of course, for FEPS, a priority for you is that inequality, of course, is addressed as well. And then we could see different turnouts or different outcomes of elections.
Absolutely, and in that sense, I would disagree a little bit, because I think that after the last regional elections in those two regions, we've run instantly to bang on the fact that the government is unpopular, that is facing difficulties. That's all very true, but we are 1 year ahead of the elections, and we are after many years of very different government in the times of post-unification of Germany. So I think, it's not resonating strongly enough. We had the conservative governments in Germany as well. Those things like Thüringen don't happen overnight. I mean, this is a trend that have been noted 2017 and before, something to reflect about how unification process has happened, because many say that the eastern states of Germany are voting more likely like the Central and Eastern Europe than they vote like the rest of Germany, in fact.
Yeah, if I may react. So I mentioned my criticism to the government only in the fourth intervention. So the first thing is to keep the firewall and to dismantle the far right. And by the way, we have also this other new party, which is in some areas far right and Putin friend, and in social areas very left, in economic areas. They are also a big problem, and we should criticize them more than we do criticize the government. But on the other hand, there is a problem with the government. And, if we just point at the 16 years of Angela Merkel again and again and don't see the mistakes of the current government, then we will not solve the problem. There has been serious mistakes by this government, for example, on banning heating and many other issues that created a big increase of these two right or left-right parties. And if the Greens and others in the government don't understand this, then we will also not address the problem.
And of course, we don't have any Greens around the table with us or members of the FDP. We do have a socialist member in yourself. But of course, you're calling Sarah Wagenknecht a problem. But of course, many feel that she's the saviour. She came third, her party did last week. So it will be curious to see in the next few years how mainstream parties move, whether they shift more to the right. And that's a question I also put to one political expert, Toby Fogel. Take a listen.
This would be a massive downer for incumbent elites everywhere. If there's one thing that seemed hardwired into the German mind, the German political mind, it was this absolute rejection of anything relating to the Nazis, anything related to what they stood for. What worries me more at the end of the day, or equally, is really that the effect on the incumbent big tent parties, when they adopt the talking points of the populists, which again, we've seen especially with regards to migration, this gives the populists a political weight that's disproportionate really to their political power, to their voting share.
So that's Toby Fogel there. And Petrus, that's something that you were starting to touch on earlier, the point he made. We're starting to see this. That's
where influence comes from, not from taking power. They're not interested in taking power. Having power is a possibility. They want to shift the narrative and force those who are in power towards their way of seeing the world. And that's why it's important for us to resist. We've seen this happen all over the place. We've seen it happen in the UK, for example, where UKIP never took power, but the Conservative Party transformed itself into a lighter version of UKIP. And as a result, they have basically imploded. So there are lessons there to be learned for mainstream parties in Germany too, not to fall victim to those narratives that the far left and the far right are using with the sole intention of undermining their ability to deliver the solutions that people are looking for. But the tone is changing. It's shifting more to the right and probably will now for the next term.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen also the things that had been inadmissible already in the European campaign, the brutalization of politics, the things that would have been admissible and concerned as not appropriate in the public discourse. But I want to come back. I think it's a very interesting point, because effectively when we see the rise of the far right, we very often say, that's because people feel disempowered. So where this socio-economic agenda of social democrats would be. But indeed, where's the alternative on the right, I think is the right question to ask. So why are they taking the space, and why this sort of radicalization experiments in some countries, they did pay off, in some others they obviously didn't.
And just briefly, the tone inside your group as you come back now to work?
So first of all, there is some truth in what you said. We should not copy-paste the narrative of the far right. But on the other hand, when mayors in my constituency that never would even imagine to vote far right tell me, Peter, we have a problem with migration. And when entrepreneurs and workers tell me we have a problem with too much paperwork, I need to take that serious. I cannot say because AfD is pointing at this problem, I don't address the problem that average people raise. So I think that's a big point. Okay. We need to be calm and clear, but we need to take care of people's problems.
And on that conclusion, I'm going to wrap up this conversation. Thank you so much to our panel. Stay with us here on Euronews, because shortly we'll be talking about the EU Commission President's big passion, and that is getting more women into politics. See you soon. Welcome back to Brussels, my love. I'm Maeve McMahon, and along with my guests, we're taking a look back at the most talked about stories this week here in Brussels. And one, of course, was the potential makeup of the incoming European Commission. The EU Commission President was very strong back in 2019 about the importance of having a balanced male-female commission, and asked EU governments to propose 2 candidates, one male, one female. And this time around, so far, capitals have only proposed a handful of female nominees, something that Ursula von der Leyen cannot accept. We can take a listen to her now speaking to the press earlier this week.
I have, throughout my whole political life, been fighting for women having access to decision-making position and leading position. And my experience is that if you don't ask for it, you don't get it. It's a tough journey, without any question, but that does not at all change my conviction and my determination.
Ursula von der Leyen there on a topic she's clearly very passionate about. Anya, is she right to push hard for this, or will she just annoy EU capitals?
Well, absolutely, she's right to push for that, because the principle of representative democracy is that it represents and hence it's inclusive. And on the level of the leadership, we have equal amount of men and women. That being said, this whole discussion, I have to say, she says it's making her passionate. It makes me incredibly angry, because I think we are back at the same side of the table. And even more so, today, I think that the situation that has been created about this outcry, because the member states decided not to promote the parity among the nominees, majority went for one nominee and men only, may have put a gamble forward in a way of, if we put a man and then we have to go back, maybe we get a better portfolio. This sort of bargaining chip makes me incredibly upset, not to mention that I'm really afraid we have a lot of qualified women right now on the table, and their credentials might be underestimated just because we have been dominated by the parity discussion. Absolutely frustrating.
Yeah, so far only 9 female names have been forwarded, but a lot of governments argue we just had a female commissioner previously, so we don't want to have one now. Where do you weigh in this conversation?
I think there is a problem of representability across the board. It's not just a question of gender equality. We need more young people. We need more people of color. We need more people with diverse backgrounds. We need people with disabilities. We need whole of society to be represented in our politics, and it really starts at the bottom. You know, the amount of people that go into politics are almost out of a production line of a Ford car factory 100 years ago. They look exactly the same. So we need to be more. We need to be able to attract people in politics that come from a diverse set of backgrounds.
And if you look at the names, in fact, of the list of proposed, there's not much diversity in there, and it's something that Margrethe Vestager, the outgoing Danish commissioner, is really strong about. You can take a listen to her.
It's really a pity that member states do not follow through. Of course, you should tap into the talent of both half of the population and not focus on one part of the population only, the male part of the population. And you also need different life experiences to be reflected in the Commission. And you need to show boys and girls that this is what leadership looks like, men and women leading together.
This is what leadership looks like. Peter Liese, you've been in politics for decades. What do women bring to the table?
You know, first of all, it's good that we have the first ever female Commission President re-elected. And from the top 3, we have 2 women. So we have the High Representative and
Kaja Kallas
and Ursula von der Leyen, and only one man, Costa.
And Roberta Metsola, President of Parliament.
She's great. All these women are great. All these women are great, I think. And that's what the public will see. On the commissioners, I also regret that it's not more women. And as you mentioned, some countries said, we had a woman, now it's time for a man. Ireland, for example, they have a brilliant acting commissioner, Mairead McGuinness, and just for party politics, coalition deals, she has to leave. She has to leave, and they bring a man. I regret that. And I wouldn't exclude that some of the men are challenged during the hearing much more than some of the women, because not all the men are qualified. So
and of course, it's
we have qualified women in the team. I appreciate very much, for example, Henna Virkkunen, a colleague from Finland. She will make it, but if all the men will make it, there's talk about the Maltese candidate. Maybe it's fixed this week, or it's maybe fixed in the parliament.
And of course, all these commissioners will have to go through what we call these grillings, which could take place much later in the year. We're hearing perhaps November, and then the new commission would start in December. Are you agreeing with what you heard there?
About what do you mean, if I'm agreeing?
I think you looked like you were disagreeing with what he was saying there.
No, I think that we have excellent women around the table, that's for sure. I mean, Teresa Ribera is one of them, and I think she's going to make a huge difference in the next European Commission, once, of course, the European Commission is there. But I think that, the whole process is pointing to a larger structural problem, because you've said, we need more diversity, but the diversity comes from the fact that different people can engage in politics. And at the moment, if we look and we have a report, for example, about the engagement of women in this civil society organization, it's very difficult for women to get engaged in the voluntary work on the top of everything else that exists, gender pay gap and the like. Which brings me to my last point I want to sort of put in this round of the debate, is that while we are discussing gender parities when it comes to the composition of the institutions, we are not discussing about the gender mainstreaming or, in fact, the intersectional discriminations that we are having and how the existing roadmap that we have when it comes to the empowerment, specifically of women in this case, should translate in the representation in the board, in the company boards, and everything else that the Parliament has been working on in the past mandate.
And of course, you have to pick your battles, don't you, when you're in a top job or you're the boss? Do you think she's picking the right battles there, or will she really kind of peeve off member states? Because we're seeing it's getting quite serious, and some countries have said publicly that they will not do what they're told by Brussels.
Yes, and it boils down to the interinstitutional fight we often experience here in Brussels, especially for us insiders. We see it every day. There is indeed a conflict between the Council, the Commission, the European Parliament. And unfortunately, in an ideal world, perhaps the President of the Commission would have the authority to select her own team, rather than expect other people to give her who she should appoint. So the problem can be resolved by structural changes too.
And the problem can be also that 26 commissioners is a lot of people around the table, no? Too many people to invite even over for dinner.
That's true.
Depends on the table.
Depends on the table. But of course, we'll have to wait and see over the next few weeks and months as they get their names confirmed and, of course, have their grillings in the Parliament. Yourself and your colleagues will have to say yay or nay to them. But I'm afraid that brings this conversation to an end. Thank you so much to our guests for being with us. And thank you so much for watching. Take care and see you soon. Welcome back to Brussels, my love. And as you heard earlier, there was a real back to school vibe this week here in Brussels. People were physically here, but mentally perhaps still on the beach. You could say the same for schoolgoers across the continent who are gradually getting back to the classrooms. And one major change for many of them will be a new mobile phone ban. From Denmark to Greece, France to the Netherlands, a number of schools are testing phone bans to boost focus and, of course, crack down on cyberbullying. Here in Belgium, a partial ban is already in place in some regions. To hear if it works, we asked Julien Nickes from the Wallonian Educational Board.
A
number of schools have already introduced strict rules on the use of smartphones in schools. Some have banned them. Opinions are unanimous among teaching staff, head teachers, parents, and even the pupils themselves. But I insist, smartphones must be left in the classroom when we are working on educational activities, like artificial intelligence or media literacy. So our aim is not to ban the smartphone completely, but rather to regulate its use and to define the times when teachers decide to use it with their pupils. Apart from that, the smartphone stays either in the pocket or in the school bag.
Soit dans la poche, soit dans la mallette.
So Petros, is it a good idea?
First of all, we have to separate the phone from what's in the phone. Because as we heard, the smartphone can actually be a great tool for learning, for education, for expanding horizons, communicating with your peers. But unfortunately, in that smartphone, there are social media networks, there is harmful content, there is destructive bombarding of advertising. And I think that's the big debate we should have. At which age our children should have access to that kind of products, and above all, whether those products, whether those platforms are regulated enough and they are safe for our children to use.
Well, the answer is not, clearly not. I mean, France as well, they're rolling out a test now for up to 15-year-olds. Will it work though? Anya, will it be implemented correctly?
But that's a question of two things. Number one, it's a question of a social contract. I mean, I have been working as a teacher at the Polish school, and I've been teaching actually 14 and 15 years olders. And my agreement with them was that out of respect from them to me and from me to them, and out of the fact that the school is not only a place where you teach the subject, but it's a place of socializing, getting to learn how you live in the society, the mobile phones stay in the pocket or in the backpacks. That's very important, I think, especially not only because, as you said, not only about what is inside of the mobile phones, but we are talking about preventing the dangers such as cyberbullying, hatred, which is taking place, but also looking after mental health, which I think, especially after COVID, we have to take very seriously when it comes to schools.
And cyberbullying, that's a real problem.
I'm a medical doctor and health politician, and I know also the health effect, the negative health effect of using too much iPhones, using too much social media. That is affecting the health of children and young people really seriously. So I like all these proposals. On the other hand, we shouldn't regulate from Brussels. So it's a thing that should be regulated on the ground, because there are different situations. And of course, all these details, when are you allowed to use it and when are you not? We cannot make a European one-fits-all solution.
How do you address that issue? And not just among kids and teenagers, but also among grown-ups and adults?
Yeah, absolutely. It's distorting the focus, but also above of that, I mean, it creates a sort of the bubbles. I mean, we know how it works. You get very selective approach, and what we want education to be about is to create critical citizens that can choose for themselves. This is why I think I'm coming back to my point about the social contract, why it is so important. But speaking of that, I mean, when we were talking about changing of the work culture, maybe a slightly different topic at that, there is an attempt of regulating when it comes to the European Union level, and there was a discussion in the last European Parliament about that. The key question is the culture, and I think as long as we don't create the overall culture, we will have the teachers battling the students revolting possibly against the teachers.
On that point, we can bring this discussion to a close. Thank you so much to our panel this week, Petros Vassoulas from the European Movement, Anya Šupek from FEPS, and Peter Lisa. Thank you so much for being with us. And thank you, of course, for watching. If you've any comments on anything you've heard today, please reach out. Our email address is brusselsmylove@euronews.com. Thanks for watching. See you soon.